Hi, Anvish. Good evening.
Let me share my screen. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Anvish. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was discussing yesterday about what I would be teaching today about
Directives.
routing. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, we discussed about directives yesterday. Today it would be routing. So simple concept, but really necessary for you if you're dealing with multiple stages. So anyways, basically tells like as of now we have only dealt with single page, right? Whenever we make changes, it's only in one page. We're not navigating it to a different page. But usually, whenever you see a web page, it has more than one page, right? Let's say I'm opening YouTube, or I mean, it can be any web page, right? So I click on something, it redirects me to a particular page with a particular link down here. It would send all of these details. It would append that to the web link, and also it would redirect me to that. So it's important that we understand how it's also done in using Angular. So the main important thing of routing is to navigate between pages. And sometimes it's in the case which I've shown you, like what I have here. I don't know if I click on this one, it takes me to this web page, right? But you see the URL is not that descriptive. It says watch v equal to so and so. But some web pages, like most of the modern web pages, they have a particular put a slash, for example, watch or groups feed again. It's simply by reading the URL, you can actually see what it is, right? Like it takes me to a link where it is giving me the feed of our whatever particular groups I've subscribed to, or watch or anything of that sort. But anyways, what I'm saying is like also it would also be useful if I can make it more readable, right? It's not necessary, but in certain situations, it can be useful. Like when someone is trying to navigate to your web page, they can just do that easily by just saying, for example, .com/ and they usually use this, right? Feed groups, something like that. So yeah, so one of the main things of navigation or routing is to navigate between pages and also use that. So we have a simple project here. Right now, we don't have anything added for navigation, but we can do that. But that is what we're going to do. So let me open that first. Localhost 4200. So I have this web page where I have a bunch of servers and a couple of different users. But I have all the information in just one page, right? If I click on servers or users, I don't have any links. You can also look at the app HTML down here, right? It simply says href is nothing but just that page, since I'm using hash. let us try adding navigation. So one of the ways you can add navigation is by actually going to app module and defining how can we navigate. Again, just to remind you, Angular is nothing but a bunch of components, right? So whenever we are saying we are trying to navigate different pages, between different pages, it's nothing but navigating between different components and also passing data between different components. So that is what we have to define in this app.module. Not saying you have to actually do it here, but this is one of the easiest ways of adding navigation or routing. Okay. So in order to do that, first we have to define path. So basically saying this is how I would navigate when I do this. For example, when what I'm simply saying is whenever I say facebook.com and backslash, and when I say groups and feeds, I'm simply saying when I do this, go to a particular page, right? Right now, since I didn't log in, it's taking me to this default page. But if I log in, it would take me to my groups. But anyways, so depending on the URL, it needs to go to a different component in our case. So let's define the routes. So sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, so let me define our navigation down here, or routes in here. So in order to define routes, again, we have a inbuilt value for that. It's routes, and let us also import that, and we can define our routes here. And as you can see, this is an array. So I can define multiple routes. Since any web page wouldn't have just one URL, it would have multiple URLs. It also makes sense that it has multiple. It's an array. Anyways, so there are different things we have to specify for a particular route. First thing is the path. Okay, let's say once we open our thing here, okay, so I'm complaining, but we have, if you can see clearly, we have home, servers, and users. So I have to navigate to 3 different pages, and in order to do that, I have to define 3 different paths, right? So the first path, it's obvious, right? So when we are at home, we don't want to actually have any link, but it needs to simply go to this default page. In order to define that, this is how we would do that. So in the path, I wouldn't define anything. So when I'm saying, when it's empty, just go to the home component, right? So I would define the component, and I would simply say the component would be home component. Okay. So similarly, since when I don't have any path defined, I need to go to the home component, because that is what every web page has, right? Like not just that, even for Google, when I do that, it doesn't have any slash, and it doesn't have anything in particular. It's basically google.com. And once I do that, it goes to the home page. So if I'm trying to define a home page, I usually don't define any path, but just the basic path, whatever I have here. Okay. And the second thing I want to define, again, if I go back here, I want to define a particular route for servers. And the simplest way of doing that is simply saying servers. And this one, it would assume whenever I say servers as a path, it simply assumes it. I'm doing that when I put a backslash and a server here. So servers and the component in here again would be servers component. And similarly, again, for the last one, since I want to go to users, let me define users and the component with the user component. Any questions about this? It's clear, right? Like defining 3 different routes and have defined what components it needs to go to access those. So give me 1 second. So defining this one, okay, since I defined this one, let me go back and see if it does something. So I have backslash servers. It's still loading the home page, right? It doesn't do anything. So, and also the same thing for users. When I do that, right here, I've defined those paths, but I'm not passing this path to anything. So I need to pass that to something called router module. So I have to first define it in the imports here. I would say router module and for route. And here I have to pass whatever routes I've defined here. So in here I have to pass app routes. And also, okay. Okay, it still doesn't do much. So let us see what is happening. So I have app routes, router module, and another thing we have to define here is this is another directive. Again, this directive tells where do we have all the routes. So it's router outlet. So the first thing is define the app routes based on the routes and inject that to router module. Next thing is have it here. Have a router outlet. This is the directive, and I just have to define that wherever I want to define the routes. Okay, so let us go back here and let us say servers. Now it goes to the server, right? And if I say users, it goes to the users. But let me say users, not just one, but there are 2 different components. So I got multiple users here. Okay, is this clear? Any questions about any of these? Okay, so it's as simple as it can be. So I have to define the routes, pass it to router module, and also use a router outlet where we want to access all those routes. usually, most commonly, we would have it in the app component HTML page, but depending on your purpose, you may want to change this one. But I've of all the cases I've seen, it's usually in the app component HTML. That is where I have to define this directive. This is another directive for Angular. Okay, so right now we have defined all of those, but if I go back to our web page and click on the links here, it doesn't do much, right? So I also have to define where it needs to go in the href, right? So first thing, href, when it's home, right? So I don't have to define anything in particular. So once I click on home, it needs to be here. So the href would be simple \, or I can just leave it with a hash. So either way it would work. And for servers, I have to go to the server link, right? So simply saying needs to go to \servers. So when I say \servers, okay, let me show you. And for users, I need to go to \users. And it's important that whatever href we have defined here in the link, it should match to the one you have defined in the path. So, and that is how we could actually know. So let us refresh this again. Click on servers. Now it's changing that, also changing it here. And once I click on users, it's getting here to our users page. Any questions about any of these? Okay. So once I'm home, you see it says welcome, so on and so forth. So once I click on servers, another thing you can actually observe, if you look at the refresh down here, it's actually not just loading the page, but it's also refreshing the entire thing. Not saying it is good or bad, but in our case, it's just static data, right? It's not any dynamic data. We're not trying to fetch any data from the server. So we don't want the page to refresh every single time. So in order to do that, there is another, instead of using href, we can use something called another attribute. This is another Angular attribute. It's called router link active, or router link. And if I use a router link, the main advantage of this is, you see, it's not actually refreshing the page, but it's just loading it. As simple as that can be. Okay, but you see that even though I'm clicking servers, it's not, the tab isn't moving to servers, or when I click on users, you don't see the one on the top, it's not moving there. It's just users. When I click on that, it comes to here, but the tab isn't moving on the top. So in order to, again, add that, we have router link active, another parameter, and another attribute which we can, Angular attribute which we can pass to a particular component. So I would simply define it in here, router link active, and simply say it's active. And I would do the same thing for others. So since I'm clicking on, the list item down here, this is the list item. And since I'm clicking on that and I want that to be the highlight, this is the router link active is equal to active. This is the Bootstrap thing, Bootstrap Angular thing where if you define this one and equal to active, it just goes back to the active. Again, you see, once I click on here, it is fine. But once I click on servers, it's showing a tab on two places. It's a little bit not intuitive, right? Users may be confused, like where are they actually clicking on? So again, to prevent that from happening, we have another attribute, and we just use that here. So we have router link active and router link active options. So when I'm trying to use router link active options and exact equal to true, it only shows that when it's on that particular link. It doesn't highlight when it's on a different one. So click on this, it goes to the second one. Click on this, and it goes to the third one. So any questions about any of these? It's mostly straightforward things as of now, whatever we have discussed. Yeah, you have any questions, Lakshmi? If you're talking, I can not hear you.
Hello.
Yep, I can hear you now.
Yeah, no Anvesh. No questions.
Okay. Cool. So far, whatever we've defined it in the HTML page, right? Like how to navigate from one component to another. Again, most of the navigation, whatever we have defined for Angular, is between components. So that is how we would be doing it. And we would define all the routes in app_module.ts. And let's say I have a button. Let me add a button. Just looking at okay, let me define a button down here in this page. The main app component, HTML. I have it in the home. Okay. So far, whatever example I've shown you, it's mostly links in the HTML page, but sometimes you also want to access the links or from the TypeScript or yeah. So you want to, in order to do that, so let me show an example. Let's say I will define a click event. So let's say go to server. And here, let me define. So in order to navigate from TypeScript, the first thing, one of the first things we have to define is we have to inject the route parameter, or we have to call that. So router and simply access that. This dot router, again, I have to inject the router in order to navigate using TypeScript. This is how we would do. I have to inject router in the constructor and access that wherever you want to access that. Anyways, and simply, it is simple syntax as well, router dot navigate. And I would have to define where I have to navigate. So again, if you see here, it's an array. I would explain, or let me first show you. I would simply say servers here and navigate there. If you have, just go to server, but we can also make it better. BTM using Bootstrap. I'll just add those in. Okay. So once I click on here, it needs to go to servers. For some reason, it's not navigating. So let us look at what is going on. Again, I'm showing you how to, or how am I debugging this, right? So I have a button click here. Once I click on that, it needs to go to server. It needs to navigate. It's as simple as that. The first thing I would want to check if it's even hitting this one, because that is what I'm trying to do here. So once I click on that, it is not actually going to that particular method. So if I look down here, it's not calling the function, but it's just a variable name. So let me change that to a function. And once I click on, now it actually hits this breakpoint. Anyways, so once I do that, it goes to servers. So the syntax is pretty straightforward. I have to inject the router class into the constructor. And once I do that, I simply would say navigate and whatever URL. Again, the important thing you have to notice here is whatever URLs I'm giving here, they need to be defined already in the routes. Again, if this is internal application, so if I'm trying to access something within our own web page, I have to match it to something down here. If it's an external web page, I don't have to actually make sure that's it's part of the routes. Okay. Any questions about any of these? So define routes. Done that. Showing you how to navigate using router link, and also from the TypeScript page, from the TypeScript file. Okay. Usually, whenever we are navigating to a particular page, trying to find a good example. So here I have defined I have two different folders, one for users component, another one for user component. So right now, if I go to my web page, once I click on users, it's showing all of the users, right? But it doesn't, I have multiple users, right? But what if I want to navigate to one particular user, not all of those? There are certain situations where we may want to access just one record, not all the records, right? Have Max, Anna, and Chris defined here. I don't want to all the users, but I just want to access one user at a time. So in order to do that, let us go back to app modules here. And in here, I have to, again, define a particular path for that. So first thing, I have to define the path, like path. Still, I want to go to users, but I want to go to a particular user. So in here, I've defined users class to have 3 values. The first one, which has an ID 1 and a name Max. Similarly, the rest of them. So depending on which user I want to access, I can access it by using 2 different ways, right? I can either get access to it by ID, or I can get access to that by name. So that is what I have defined here. So we can actually do the same thing here. So users backslash, I want to access it by ID. And let's say if I want to get the first one, okay, simply by saying 1 or ID 1. This is one way of doing it, right? I can simply say component users. I want to go to user component. And if I want to go to the second one, I can simply similarly have ID2. Again, if I have 10 different ones, I can define it in the same way, like I can define 10. But it's not always the case, right? We exactly don't know how many records we actually need to navigate to. It can be 1, it can be 1,000 records. We may have 1,000 records or something. So the best way of actually doing this one is making this a parameter. So once I say ID here, what it actually translates to is so in terms of have a local host 4200 backslash users. Again, the ID is an integer down here, right? It's a number, ID equal to 1. So it can be one of the values. So it can be 1, can be 2, can be 3, so on and so forth. So just by saying, by defining colon down here, I'm saying this one is a parameter. It's not static, but rather dynamic. So I can pass any value down here, and depending on that value, we would display different values. Okay, so we have, again, I can just display it by ID. I can also display it by passing 2 values. I can, in order to pass 2 values, would simply say ID, again, backslash, would simply say colon and name. By doing this, whenever I'm trying to go to this particular path, right, users backslash 1 backslash name. So backslash, let's say Kenny or George or any other name. So whenever I specify it in this order, users backslash 1 backslash Kenny, it needs to go to that particular user and needs to display the information of that particular user down here. So I would still have users, and I'm still passing these. I'm defining these to be dynamic, not static, as we have here. So I can pass different parameters down here. /1 / whatever name is. So once I do that, it goes to the user component down here. Any questions about passing parameters?
No questions, Anvesh.
Okay. So let us see how it actually works. So users 1 /, let's say I'm saying hero. It goes to that page, but the only thing is that it's still showing the static value, right? It's just showing ID or it's just showing name. It's not showing whatever values are passed. Okay, let's fix that. Similar to what classes, whatever we have injected before, again, in order to access. So right now, this component doesn't know what values it is getting, right? Right now, it simply thinks whenever I have /1 /0 or / whatever, it needs to go to this component, but this component doesn't actually know what parameters I'm trying to pass here. It doesn't know what values I'm getting down here. So in order to define that, in order to understand what values I'm getting, we have to inject another class. So let's, the class is activated route. We have to inject this one and also make sure that you have that in the import and get that from Angular router. Okay, and in John init, I have got kite accesses this dot user. Let me assign those values, and I've defined the user to have two values, right? One is ID, another is name. So the ID would be this dot root. Again, there is a property called snapshot dot params. So whatever parameters I'm getting, could get it from the activated root dot snapshot dot params, and I would simply say what value, whatever value it's trying to pass. Again here, I'm trying to pass an ID here, right? So that is what the parameter it's trying to get here. So simply say ID. And similar to that, I would have this dot route dot snapshot dot params of, again, trying to pass a name. So let me copy paste that here. Okay. I have that, but it's still showing ID and name, right? Because I'm not actually changing anything in HTML. So in order to change that, again, we can use our standard string interpolation, right? So simply I would say this, not this, but user dot ID and user dot name. So once we do that, you can see it got those values. It says user with ID 1 loaded and username is 0. I can simply give any values down here. Again, this is making it dynamic. You can see 0 and 100 loaded and 0. Yep. Sorry, you have a question?
Sorry, no Anvesh. Just
Okay.
unmute.
So, anyways, thought this would take entire hour and a half, but yeah, this is how we can actually use routing to navigate between different components. And thought this would take 1.5 hours, but looks like it didn't. So, yeah. Again, if I add new components, all I have to do in order to navigate is I just have to define another path here and define what component I need to go navigate to. And I've also shown you how can I also pass values to a particular component. This would be really useful if you're trying to. In our example, I've just shown you I can just read that and pass that to our HTML page. But in real world situations, it would be more like I would get that value and I would try to query a database to get something else. Again, this is a simple example. The values which you're trying to pass may be complicated, and yeah. Anyways, if you don't have any questions, let me. So we have a few more topics to complete this. So one of them is I have one more. And injection. Not that one, but services. These are 3 other topics which I will be covering. If you are free on the weekend, I can try to discuss more, and we can finish it next week sometime. So, are you free on the weekend with the class?
Hi, Anvesh. Yeah. Let's continue it to the weekend.
Okay. So I'll so services again. These are really important topics. Angular has a. I mean, if you want to learn everything in Angular, it probably would take even more. There are more things you can actually go through. Like, for example, there is what topic is this? NGRX. This just going through this one is entire. This may take a week, but in a day-to-day, you may or may not use this one, NGRX, or using creating animations. Again, it depends on whatever work you're doing. You would or you may not. So again, these are advanced topics, NGRX or animation, or also using offline, doing something offline. So we can also do that using Angular, or you can also make a mobile app using Angular. So there are a lot of topics we can actually discuss, but these would take even longer. So I'm trying to just go through the basics of Angular. So once you start working, at least you have some good basic knowledge, and you can learn anything later on. So anyways, I'll be teaching these three topics: observables, forms, and services. Maybe I will start with the services, then go through observables and forms. Or anyways, so services is more about accessing external data. As of now, we have only discussed how to access something static, right? Whatever we have defined in here, like we may define a class and we would define all the values down here. But services are more of external data. It's not just whatever we have defined. And forms, we have gone through this when we were discussing HTML, but in Angular, forms are handled in a different way. And the other thing is observables. This is about dynamic data. Again, once we get to these topics, you would understand better. So on a weekend, what time would work better? In the morning, afternoon, or in the evening? So I can schedule the class for them.
Evening is okay, Anvesh.
What?
Evening is okay.
Evening is okay. Okay, cool. So, I'll schedule and try to finish this. So by the end of sometime next week, we can be done with all the basics. And one thing I want to ask you is, like, do you want to do a bigger project? Because just going through all of these, just listening to all of these, you would learn, but it would make a better experience, or you would retain more information if you actually do a bigger project. So at the end of all of this, I can give you a bigger project. I would define it, and you can work on that, and that way you.
Sure, Anvesh.
Okay. So so next week I will give you a bigger project to work on. You would be using these concepts, and also depending on whatever you're working on, you may have to find new things as well. So
yeah, sure.
okay, then I'll schedule the class on Saturday and Sunday. Then we can talk then. Okay then. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.